Hello, everyone. It has been a hot minute since I've done anything with this pile of shite channel. Since I have nothing going on with my life, might as well do something here. You know, very simple. Speaking of which, Chucky versus Slappy is one of, if not the most popular matchup for both Slappy and Chucky. It has been around before I even became a real Goosebumps fan or a power scaler, and it has managed to accumulate a small but loyal following of people that would love to see it on Death Battle. I used to be one of these people, but nowadays, after scaling both of the characters, this versus match isn't really that good, both in connections and in actual fight. Mediocre, surface level, and non specific connections, and the fight itself is a complete stomp. This video will be a documentation of my exact thoughts on this MU. That I honestly think this matchup is really outdated and made by people that only really know about the Slappy in the TV adaptation of Goosebumps. Before I get into this mess, let me go over the rules slash guidelines I have set in order to make this sensible, aka not like Death Battle. Um, Number one, main cans only. In the case of Chucky, I'll only be going over the movies and TV show. The comics will be left out as it is unclear as to whether or not they are canon. Canon is a term that holds very little water in terms of Goosebumps, but I will only be going over the books and things that can be solidly connected to the book, quote unquote, canon. Mainly the game Goosebumps Enter Horrorland, a browser game that is supposed to go along with the Goosebumps Horrorland books, and the books frequently directs the readers to this website so they can further explore Horrorland. So the movies, the comics, the video games, and whatnot won't be brought up here, just the books. Number two, plot-induced stupidity. I've already gone over this, but let me explain it here again. Plot-induced stupidity is a term used to describe events in a story that contradict the character's capabilities. Things like the Hulk, a character multi-solar system level to universal level feats, being threatened by an ornate python would fall under this. This is not only a big issue for Slappy, but just horror villains in general. Across numerous debates, I've seen people judge Slappy's power just off the fact that he gets beaten by humans, mainly children. This is despite the fact that he has a stupidly consistent lineup of evidence pointing towards Slappy being beyond human capabilities in general. This problem also extends to Chucky and the other horror icons like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, who, despite being obviously superhuman, still get beaten by teenagers and shit. This usually happens in horror media for the sake of a happy or twist ending, so I think it is universally best that we ignore this sort of thing. Thirdly, just like in my other videos, I'll be using terms and calcs from versus FicWic. I know they have a negative stigma around how they scale characters, but I'll only be going over their tiering system and calculations. I don't like the website myself. I think it is full of dumb people, but to assume that everything they have to say is wrong and should be ignored just because they said something about the scaling of Thor or some other character that is completely irrelevant here in a Goosebumps vs. Child's Play matchup is just equally stupid. With that out of the way, let's dive into things, starting with the connections. In case you are confused, in the context of the Versus community, Connections is just what two characters have in common. People tend to like it when the characters that are fighting are alike, having a number of connections. With Chucky versus Slappy, there aren't many connections, and most of them are pretty simple. Those being that they're horror evil killer dolls, and both of them were former humans that put their souls into dolls' magic. Let's start with the first one. While Slappy isn't above murdering people, he usually prefers domination than outright destruction. As in, he prefers to enslave people than to kill them. Slappy has killed and attempted to kill people before, but that number is very small compared to his enslavements and attempts to make someone his slave. So this is focusing on something that is a really small part of his character. As for the other bits, they're true, but they aren't really special. They aren't specific to Slappy. The really broad, surface level aspects of Slappy's character slap these same words of any other horror doll villain, and it would work just as well. If anything, there are characters that fulfill this connection even better. The main one being the main one that comes to mind for me is the dolls from Puppet Master, but I'm certain there are better examples of them out there. As for the other one, while it does dwell on the origin history of Slappy, it isn't entirely correct. Slappy's soul, Slappy's ghost isn't just a soul, unlike Chucky, but rather it is his own abstract evil, a conceptual entity. While it still functions as a spirit, it isn't quite a soul, if that makes sense. It is revealed to us in Bride Living Dummy, where Slappy's soul spirit is also referred to as his evil, and these two things are used interchangeably. In Slappy Beware, it is explicitly said that Darkwell put his evil inside of Slappy, which was what brought Slappy to life in the first place. So it is made clear that the ghost thing isn't an actual soul like other ghosts in Goosebumps, but it is the evil of himself or the evil of his creator, depending on which legend you want to go with. So Slappy didn't put a soul inside him, especially if we're using the origin legend given to us in Slappy Beware, where Slappy and his human creator are two different people. These two connections are the main ones that I see. The rest of what I've seen is just misinformation on Slappy's end. The only other one that I could think of is that they both use magic, which isn't really a good connection, and Slappy very much specializes in it way more. Chucky is basically a regular dude that dabbles in magic a bit and occasionally uses them in like two or three situations. On the other hand, Slappy is an ancient, masterful wizard that regularly uses his magical powers. You can also say that they are both wisecracking dickheads, which is true, but I'm gonna go over right now the that the fight wouldn't last long enough for any sort of banner to occur. From my experience, people nowadays tend to care more about the connections and quote unquote vibe of a fight. I was admittedly never that much into connections. I was more focused on balance, if the fight is actually fair. That's what makes a fight interesting, really. Like, connections can only go so far in the battle if the battle is completely one sided. It also hinders other things like banter and animation potential. Of course, whether or not a fight is fair is determined on where you scale the two opponents, and given power scaling's subjective nature, people can come to different conclusions on things. But Chucky versus Slappy, I can't possibly see an outcome where Chucky stands a ghost of a chance without massively downplaying Slappy and ignoring factors. Some people get the impression that Chucky is stronger, given his series is more brutal, but that isn't how power scaling works, so let's go do some actual power scaling. The best feat that Chucky has ever shown in the mainline canon is in his buff body, where he punched through a dude's chest, tearing out the heart as well. Admittedly, I don't have a direct calc for this, but generally speaking, outside of breaking finger bones, breaking bones would be street level. Depending on the angle of attack, it would require 375 to 9,920 joules. I guess the latter end is more applicable given the sheer brutality of the feat, barely any pieces of the ribcage are visible. It would be absolutely absurd for this to be just barely leaving the minimum of street level. You could probably consider this wall level, but without a proper calc, you can't give. Without a proper calculation that can give a joule value, he can't be assumed to be beyond baseline wall level. It should be noted that this is the only solid tier 9 feat that Chucky has shown. Yes, he has killed a lot of people, but practically all of his kills are done with the element of surprise. Like Chucky had the stealth advantage, it caught them by surprise, and done with either blade weapons or weapons that would be considered tier 9 even in the hands of a regular person, like a baseball bat. Regardless of that, this punching chest feat is still pretty impressive. Anyway, here is Slappy fighting a dude named Slappy, both of which tanked an explosion and destroyed an entire garage, which has been calculated to be worth 0.1 tons of TNT, or 418.4 megajoules. Here is Slappy shrugging off a ferocious beating from Goddess, who not only destroyed a dinosaur skeleton in 2 punches, but smashed through a stone floor, which would be worth 4 megajoules. Slappy can harm those who can harm him. Hell, Snappy is literally Slappy's twin. So with that Goddess feat, he would be 272.5 times stronger than this peak buff Chucky. And unlike with Chucky, Slappy being tier 9 is very consistent. Just look at the admittedly outdated Responsky profile on Book Slappy. Like, that, the AP section is just absolutely loaded. In speed, Chucky fares no better. Chucky doesn't have any actual speed feats. He has dodged bullets before in the first movie, but throughout the rest of the series, he fails to dodge gunfire. And later on in the same movie, he fails to dodge shots from the same gun he was able to previously dodge. You could probably consider this an outlier, but for fairness' sake, I won't do that here. Even if we do accept this wouldn't be an absolute, it'd be like an absurd, an abusable level of subsonic reaction speed, and he wouldn't be able to do this consistently. He wouldn't always be able to dodge the bullets. In comparison, Slappy is usually depicted as being superior to humans, being able to move and attack before they can react. He can also keep up with Mr. Wood, who was able to speed blitz a terrier dog, which can generally run up to speeds of 30 to 38 miles per hour. In the streets of Panic Park, he and the other characters were able to outrun a mob, and he was able to keep up with Dr. Maniac, who could travel across cities in quick succession. I'm just From my experience, People nowadays tend to care. Slappy having superhuman levels of speed gets even more consistent when you scale into other entities like Haunted Mask. So when it comes to stats, Slappy easily has it in the bag, having both the strength and speed advantage by a landslide. Even if we do include this stuff from the comics, without any calculations, Slappy would still have the advantage in both areas. But what about with magical powers? I'm just gonna say it right now. Slappy completely fucks Chucky on terms of magical powers, both in versatility and functionality. People tend to over exaggerate Chucky's magical powers. Yes, he can possess other bodies and swap souls with others, but here's the thing. All of Chucky's magical powers a drawn out rituals that can be easily interrupted. In comparison, Slappy can pull out his magic willy nilly. Some powers some people would argue that Chucky suffers from similar downsides, with him needing to recite his spells. However, he isn't limited to actually saying his spells out loud, as there are numerous instances where he's able to use his magic through simple hand gestures and whatnot. A good example of this is his ability to freeze people in place like statues. In the book, Slappy Beware, shortly after being created and brought to life, he froze a group of people by actually saying the spell out loud. However, later on in his life, he used the same spell but was able to cast it by waving his hand. This is even shown with his iconic Karumari spell, the one that brings things to life, as he was able to cast this spell and wave with a wave of his hand and Slappy breathed you, bringing life to a whole supply of broken dolls. As for what Slappy can do with his magic, there's quite a lot. You can mind control Chucky, induce death in the Chucky, cause Chucky to grow until he pops like a balloon, turn Chucky into a small animal like a frog or rat, inflict diseases upon him, freeze him like a statue, leaving him helpless, etc., etc. Slappy is a very hacksy character, way more hacksy than anything Chucky has ever faced and could reasonably match. Back to Chucky, let's talk about the main white column people like to throw around. Chucky taking over the body of Slappy. As I already mentioned, in order for Chucky to do this, he has to perform a ritual in order to do this. He would, However, he would also need to incapacitate Slappy first, which he you can't just take over Slappy's body from a distance or something like that. What I failed to mention beforehand, however, is that Chucky's possession is actually limited. In the Chucky TV show, specifically in the season 1 episode, An Affair to Dismember, it is elaborated that Chucky can only possess good guy dolls. Like his possession can only work if he's trying to possess an identical vessel. You can possess other things like humans, but it is an absolute. Regular people like Nika and Father Bryce can fight against it and potentially break out of it. If an ordinary person can snap out of it, there is no doubt in my mind that someone as powerful as Slappy could do the same. This is also ignoring the fact that Slappy resists possession. In Into Horrorland, he is shown wearing a haunted mask for an extended period of time without it fusing to him and taking over his body. We can tell the haunted mask didn't actually take over Slappy as during the whole fight, which you fight the guys, we see skeletons magically reconstructed and sent to fight the player. The mask has never shown any sort of necromancy like this, but Slappy has actually shown this ability. In The Dummy Meets the Mummy, where he gave life to a giant dinosaur skeleton, as seen earlier in the AP section. There's also the fact that Mr. Wood the player was able to knock it off a Slappy with a simple slingshot. If it had merged on the Slappy's face, this wouldn't have happened. Even ignoring this is assuming that Chucky can actually affect Slappy's soul. Slappy's soul is an abstraction, a concept, literally his own evil, and it isn't shown that Chucky can affect conceptual souls with his magic, unlike Slappy. On top of Slappy's resistance towards magic, with him recovering or being completely unaffected by numerous spells across the Goosebumps franchise, Chucky's magical powers would be useless unless you want to wank them. There are many other factors that would make Slappy even more impossibly hard for Chucky to deal with, but I won't go over them here because I feel like I did a good enough job explaining how Slappy is just on a whole other level of bullshittery than Chucky. So things like his ghost form or plot hacks would be mega overkill. To get a couple of things clear with this video, I am not saying that Slappy is a better character than Chucky, or that Goosebumps is a superior series than Child's Play. If you ask me, the quality of the Child's Play series trumps the vast majority of the Goosebumps franchise. This also isn't me saying that there is no version of Slappy that Chucky can defeat. Peak Chucky, as described here, can probably take on a good number of incarnations of Slappy, like his IDW or TV adaptation versions. He could fuck up home base Slappy though, given just how pathetic he is. Practically every version of Slappy has at least one trump card that Chucky can't get around, and most of them have the physical advantages, besides home base Slappy, who sports no feats in any category and lacks any abilities that could kill or incapacitate someone beyond a few brief moments. Lastly, before anyone even mentions or hints the idea of a composite Chucky, in order to be actually fair, you would have to composite Slappy too. And a composite Slappy is an absolute nightmare of a character, just to tell you. I have an entire page dedicated going over the powers and shit of a composite Slappy. If you want to check that out, a link to it will be in the description. But for those who don't feel like reading it, a composite Slappy is absolutely nuts. A Hax god that not only has over 180 different abilities, but can reach universal levels of power and inaccessible levels of speed. As said already in earlier in this video, I feel as if this matchup is was started and is still supported by people that only know the TV incarnation of Slappy or don't fully understand the capabilities of Slappy. If you still like this matchup after like everything I've said, that's fine. But if but if you try to argue that this matchup is fair, you just look silly. Slappy has advantages in both strength and speed, and has numerous abilities that could easily give him the win. It makes sense for Slappy to be so busted, since Slappy has over 30 years of material that can be used for scaling, and resides in a wacky verse with strange concepts built up by numerous different authors. Meanwhile, in comparison, Chucky's progression is way more linear, and the Child's Play series is way more grounded in reality, so to speak. Also, one last thing, there seems to be this strange brand of people that are arguing Chucky to be tier 1. With him, that line of logic is people arguing that he transcends fiction because he interacts with quote unquote real stuff. Not only is this line of reasoning just really stupid and for numerous reasons that I don't want to go over in detail about, but Slappy is way more fourth wall breaking shenanigans than Chucky. If we are okay with applying this flawed reality, fiction, interaction bullshit on Chucky, then we should have no issue applying it to Slappy as well. unless we just feel like jerking Chucky's tiny prick. I might make a follow up video going over additional stuff and maybe some extra responses, depending if this video does well. A good solid half of me doubts that, since the YouTube algorithm has better things to recommend to the death battle audience, which mostly consists of kids. I don't know. Only time will tell. Tell that. Anyway, that's everything. See ya.